Hi, everybody. It's Rhiannon again. Welcome to our webinar this week. We're going to focus on discipline strategies. So we're going to hopefully give you guys some tips to help encourage cooperation in your children, help support positive behavior through using positive child guidance techniques. So as an overview today, first we will talk about what positive child guidance is, and then I'm going to go through some of those strategies for you. Just as a precursor to this webinar, this will be a very short, 30-minute version of information that would take hours and hours and hours to cover. So I'm going to try to narrow it down to those most important pieces for you and really give you some strategies that will hopefully increase the peace at home as far as, all of our interactions with our children and maybe decreasing some of those undesirable type behaviors that we may see in children. So one of the key things that we really want to think about when we're thinking about guidance and discipline with children is that the goal of discipline is not to give a consequence or a punishment, but to teach a lesson. So we really want to think about discipline as a way to teach, not about a way to give punishments or to kind of dole out consequences. So really keeping this in mind is that we're trying to build skills for children and we're trying to teach them things. So please feel free to jump into the chat if you have any questions, specific questions for me, and I will answer those questions at the end of this webinar. But we'll go ahead and get into these positive child guidance techniques now for you. So what is positive child guidance? It is going to be a method of communicating or interacting with our children in ways that have been found through research on child development to lead to more optimal developmental outcomes. So what we're going to do is we're going to use all of the research that we have on how children learn, on how children's brains develop, and we're going to use that to help guide their behavior so that we can help teach them how to interact appropriately in the world. So we're going to do this by guiding, supporting, and teaching them without the use of punishment. So we really want to make sure that we're keeping this in mind. Anytime that we're using punishment, we're using fear. So punishments can work in the very short-term basis, but they don't teach lessons for long-term learning. We find ourselves having to punish often, more and more often, or kind of having to increase the harshness sometimes of punishment because it doesn't work any longer. What we want to do is actually guide children to have an internal sense of what's right and wrong and to help them act in those appropriate ways that they're going to be able to learn how to do over time. So making sure that we're not using fear-based control, but we're going to use reasons and explanations. So even things like timeout are often used as a punishment when we're, kind of sending kids away and we're banishing them away from us. So we want to make sure that we're going to use this reason and explanation, and we're going to guide them. When we do this, we're going to meet their basic psychological needs. So children have a need to have a secure, trusting relationship with their parents and caregivers. When we're using punishment or fear, we're eliminating that secure, trusting relationship that kids have with us. They have to rely on us to meet their needs and to guide them. So by using positive child guidance, we're going to meet that need. We're going to meet all of their other basic needs too, and we're going to be very proactive with our care for them. We're going to, through this, teach them communication. We're going to teach them actual negotiation and conflict resolution skills, as well as appropriate social skills. It's not appropriate social skills to, just always bark orders or, follow commands, but to be able to interact effectively with our peers and with others. So we want children to know how to communicate effectively. And in order to do that, we have to model effective communication with them. We have to use conflict resolution skills with them versus just using our power to control and dominate them, because that's not how relationships and that's not how the real world is going to work. So some foundations here when we're looking at positive child guidance. So it's going to be really important to be warm and sensitively attuned to our children's feelings. So we have to be responsive to their feelings. We want to recognize too that their emotions are not bad behavior. Toddlers are going to struggle with meltdowns, and we talked about that in that last webinar. Teenagers, everybody has meltdowns and has big feelings. When we're going through those big feelings, it's not a time to dole out discipline. That's a time to manage those feelings, to name them, to get those feelings under control. And then once we've responded to feelings, then we can work on discipline. But that's going to be part of being respectful to children, is knowing what typical behavior looks like for each age groups, knowing that those meltdowns are common, testing of boundaries are going to be common, and recognizing that that's not something we have to break children of, but we need to guide them through that so that they can learn how to manage their behavior appropriately as they go through life. So we're going to strive to keep that emotionally close relationship with our children. Like I said, if we're using fear and punishment, we're not going to have this emotionally close relationship with our child, because there's going to be this aspect of fear that's keeping them from really trusting us. When we have this emotionally close relationship, it decreases the number of problem behaviors that we see with kids. It does not eliminate problem behaviors. And that's one thing we always have to keep in mind. Even with positive child guidance, right, it's going to take a lot of work. There is not just one simple solution for all of our discipline needs with children. That's why I try to give lots of different strategies, because we know that there's going to be a lot of different things that come up. But the closer we are with our children emotionally, the more proactive we are in meeting their needs, the fewer problem behaviors we're going to see, the fewer times we're going to see them acting out and doing these challenging types of things that we really need to guide them through. When we're close with them also, it's much easier to tackle those problems that come up. We're able to really address them, and we're able to see kind of where those problems are coming from, get to the root of those problems. Another important aspect of this is, especially with children and the younger that they are, the more this impacts them, but they have to be connected to us to care what we say and what we think. If children feel like we don't get them, we don't respect them, we don't know where they're coming from, they're not going to listen to us. They don't care what we think if we're not even on the same page as them. So we want to make sure that we're close with them and we're really understanding what's going on as these problems start to come up, but recognizing that it's not going to be a conflict-free relationship. That doesn't exist. We want to really kind of focus on dealing with conflict in peaceful ways, dealing with our conflict in ways that will help guide our children versus ways that kind of control them or shape them through fear. But really keeping that in mind is that we have to continue to be that trusting caregiver. And part of being that trusting caregiver is setting limits and not letting them do those things that are dangerous for them. We have to show that we are going to keep them safe. And that comes with us setting those limits and those boundaries with them as well. So some important points to consider. Like I said, I'm trying to streamline all of these tips as best as I can into 30 minutes for all of you. We have to have realistic expectations. So like I was saying before, we have to know what's expected with our child's age and their developmental level. What can we realistically expect the day to look like? What does a clean room look like to a 4-year-old compared to a grown-up? And keeping those things in mind and explaining our expectations to children as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that we are always going to intervene immediately if a child is in danger of hurting themselves, others, or breaking materials or equipment. So that's when we are going to step in immediately. We can't hurt ourselves, somebody else, or break things. Outside of that, we're going to guide the child and we're going to talk to them. We really want to focus on reasons and explanations for why they have to stop doing something, but we're not going to let them hurt themselves. And sometimes that does mean you're stepping in and physically removing a toddler, from jumping off of the table or whatever that may be. Getting in between children who are physically hitting each other, because we are not going to let you hit your brother. And we're going to intervene immediately in those instances. Another thing here is we really have to be consistent and we have to follow through. So when we say, you have to stop doing that, we have to make sure that they stop doing that action. Oftentimes, parents kind of bounce between being very permissive and letting children just, have a great time and they're bouncing on the couch or doing whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden it gets like, oh, that's too much. And then we kind of flip and we become really strict. Instead of going back and forth between, we're having so much fun and you can do whatever you want. And then, oh no, I'm the adult and I'm in control. we want to just be consistent with kids. We want to have consistent guidelines on how we interact, and we want to keep that, and we want to make sure that we do follow through on those things. When they're being unsafe, we're going to intervene immediately. When we tell them to do something, we're going to make sure that that gets done. We're not just going to keep repeating it. We may have to go help them be successful with that, but we're going to follow through. Kids will realize when we're just saying things, and if you say things 5 times and never follow through, they will stop listening, or they will, wait for that 6th time because they know it's coming. So we have to really be consistent here and set our boundaries and our expectations with kids. But when we're doing that, we can focus too that what we say and the way that we say it matters a lot. So we can have strict guidelines and expectations and boundaries with children without yelling at them, without shaming or criticizing them, without using fear. We're just going to be matter of fact. I can't let you hit your brother. We're going to be matter of fact about that. We don't have to make our faces look scary and mean and yell. We want to be matter of fact. The less reactive we are, the more we're going to actually be able to teach children. So we want to make sure that we're joining them on their level and we're talking to them in a way that they can understand. But we don't have to be harsh about it. We talk about kind of having this warm, positive, emotional tone of voice and kind of interactions with our children. We want to continue to have that most of the time in our interactions. If we're using, that strict mom voice, very seldomly, it's going to work a lot better than if we're using it all of the time. If we're yelling all of the time, you just have to keep yelling louder and louder. So finding ways to communicate effectively instead is going to be a lot more appropriate there. So focus on what kids can do. A lot of times we're just telling kids, stop, don't. And instead we can focus on what they can do. Give them something to do instead. So instead of don't hit, we can use our hands for gentle touch. Focus on something that we can give proactive instead of just stop or don't. Same thing with yelling, kind of using that word no or stop protectively and not overusing it. It will help get that point across so that when there is an emergency and we say no or stop, they will listen to us because that's not something that they've tuned out because they hear it all day long. So really focus on those positive times, focus on what they can do as best as we can to. We want to plan ahead to prevent problems that we're going to have. So try not to schedule those errands during nap time. Make sure that children are well fed, that they've had enough to sleep. All of those different types of basic physical needs have been met before we're trying to guide them or before we're going to go do an errand or something, work on their schoolwork, something that's going to challenge their limits and their self-control. Make sure that, if we're going for a long car ride, we bring books along or toys and things to do in the car. The more proactive we can be with children, the more we can kind of meet those needs in advance. And children do have legitimate needs for our time and our attention with them. They get bored, they need things to do. So having ways that they can find things to do and they can be proactive there, we can prevent a lot of problems. We can prevent a lot of problems just by also making sure, like I said, that they have eaten and that they've slept. Adults as well, right? Sometimes you just are not yourself until you have something to eat, until you finally get some rest, and kind of recognizing those times too and recognizing whether this is a good time to discipline and teach a lesson or not. And I talked about that last webinar as well, as far as really picking your battles, figuring out, is this a battle or not? And that's okay. If sometimes the agreement is, we all just need to go to sleep and we'll talk about this tomorrow. Okay, so now getting into some of these actual strategies for you. So distraction and redirection is going to be great, especially for our infants and toddlers. So especially when infants and toddlers are doing something that's unsafe, we're going to immediately step in and we're going to move them away from the situation, right? So our infant is reaching for the electrical outlet, right? Oh no, honey, that's not safe. Let me move you over here. Here's some blocks. You can play with blocks. Then we're gonna go attend to that outlet, put the plugs in, whatever it needs to do to keep that, keep our house safe for the children. As best as we can with infants and toddlers and with all children really, we want to have a yes space. We want some place where they have the option to explore and be able to do whatever they want there. Infants and toddlers learn a lot by exploring and getting hands-on with the environment. So for safety things, we want to find places where they have opportunities to do that and kind of limit those opportunities where we have to redirect them. So, you know, keeping a baby gate in the kitchen so they can't get near the stove, those types of things, so we can kind of prevent those problems in advance. But we have to make sure that we are keeping them safe. Like I said, this is one of those things where we have to be consistent and follow through. If we say that's dangerous, we can't let them just keep doing that dangerous thing until they get hurt. We're going to step in, we're going to explain to them why, and then hopefully we're going to prevent that in the future. With older children, we're going to, you know, kind of see what happens here. We can step in immediately if they're in danger of hurting themselves, others, or breaking property though. We want to direct their attention to something they can do. So it's really, with infants and toddlers, sometimes we just need to move them to a more appropriate location. Wow, you want to run? Let's go outside. Sometimes, you know, we can't play with the electrical outlet. Let's go play with those blocks. Let's give you a more appropriate activity. With young ones, distracting them can work really well. And we can distract them too by being silly or just kind of having fun. So using a silly voice, starting to whisper can both be two different ways that we can distract and kind of have fun with little ones while still redirecting their attention. So little ones may not want to, you know, give you your feet to wash them in the bathtub. But if you pretend like the washcloth is a puppet and it starts making a really silly voice and he wants to get their toes, they're much more likely to engage and give you their foot and kind of engage in that cooperation with you. I use distraction a lot, especially with little ones too. So like I said, if we yell all of the time, it starts to be tuned out. One of the things that we can do as a distraction, and it really gets kids' attention, is to whisper. So it's one of my favorite things to do when I have a toddler who does not want to get into their car seat is, you know, they're all wiggling and all over the place. So we start whispering. Instead of overpowering them, instead of battling them into that car seat and, you know, getting dripped in sweat, all of those types of things, just start whispering. Hey, what are you doing? I need you to hold still. They have to kind of calm down and be still to hear what you're saying when you're whispering. So it can be a great way to distract and to get children to start to go along with what that is we need them to do. So we don't have to fight with them and wrestle them, even though we can, to get them into that car seat. Start whispering. Then they have to join us and calm down and we can get that same task done. So don't make it a fight if it doesn't have to be a fight. Distraction doesn't work as well with older children, but it does work really well with little ones. And like I was saying, a lot of our guidance with infants and toddlers is going to be about just keeping them safe. We're explaining to them too about how the world works, giving them reasons and explanations for these types of things, but they don't have that impulse control yet. So it's our job to keep them safe there while we're giving them those guidance, and they will start to internalize and recognize those lessons as they get older and they are able to manage that. So iMessages are going to be a great strategy to use when our children are acting in a way that's unacceptable to us. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to explain why the behavior is not okay. We explain how it affects other people. So one of the reasons to use iMessages is not just children, but everybody is going to be more likely to cooperate when they're given a reason. So if somebody tells you to do something, one of the first things in your head is why, but why? If you are given a reason, hey, can you go do this because I need your help? Go file this for me real quick, and giving a reason behind it, we're more likely to go along with those types of things. When we give them reasons, they're more likely to develop those problem-solving, relationship communication skills. This is going to support their language development, their cognitive development, as well as their emotional development. Especially when we're using reasons and explanations, when we're using iMessages, we're giving them words, we're giving them explanations. That helps to support language. It starts to build their brains. They're thinking about why and thinking about what's going on and cause and effect. So we're going to very simply have 4 steps to an iMessage. So we will state what the unacceptable behavior is. So when you throw the ball in the house, then we state our feelings about it. I'm afraid. State the effect that the behavior has, that it's going to break the lamp. Then we move on to problem solving. So where else can you throw the ball? We're going to brainstorm with our child possible solutions. We're going to pick one. We're going to try it out. Then we're going to see how things go. That didn't work. Let's try something different. Really important here, anytime we're redirecting children, we're using an iMessage. When we move on to this problem solving step, we want to make sure that we're helping children be successful. So even in a child that's nonverbal, They may not come up with a solution on where else can we throw the ball. We'll talk that out for them. But for older children, and even starting from preschoolers, they can tell us, ooh, outside. Yes, you know what, let's go outside. Let's try that. Or, oh, you know what, it's too hot outside. Can we do something else inside? Come up with something different. Make sure that we're going to help them be successful with something else. So this problem solving step is going to be really important. This is part of that following through. So not only are we stopping them from throwing the ball in the house so that the lamp doesn't break, but we're getting them engaged in a more appropriate activity. Let's go throw the ball outside, or, let's sit here and color inside. We want to make sure that we are helping to guide them to solve the actual problem. A lot of times with discipline, we lose that message of teaching them, and we just focus on a consequence or on a punishment. Those punishments don't solve the problem that we're having. So we want to make sure we're successful and we get them engaged in a more appropriate behavior. All right, so these are some final strategies. I'm not going to be able to go through all of these. I talked about some of these in our last webinar, so giving things like closed choices. Transitional warnings can be really helpful, letting kids know in a little time it's going to clean up, time to clean up and have lunch, versus just, turn that off, it's lunchtime. Let them have preparation in advance as far as knowing what to expect in their lives. When we can negotiate, we want to negotiate with them, because that's going to be teaching them those real life problem solving skills. So typically there is a negotiation process. There are other options. If there are options, talk to our children about that. When there are not options, there are no options. This is what I need you to do. I need to keep you safe, whatever it needs to be, so that, right now, this is what has to happen. The more that we give children choices, the more we negotiate with them and they have options when they can, when they're available, the more that they will accept those few times when we say, hey, there's no options, I need you to do that. Keeping those times limited, just like our yelling or those extreme types of reactions, are going to really help in the impact that they have in really strengthening that relationship. An important thing too is to really make amends. So ask children, how can we make this better? Oftentimes asking children that question, they're going to come up with something that's much more meaningful to get at the root of the problem, to get at a real solution, versus go say I'm sorry, or go to your room, or I'm taking your phone away as a punishment. None of those things solve the problem. So asking a child, hey, how can you make this better? They can come up with those solutions. And sometimes we'll be really surprised at their solution. Their way to make amends may be a lot more intensive than maybe the punishment we thought would have been appropriate there. And it's going to actually teach them a lesson when they come up with that and they follow through on making amends, on repurchasing the lamp that they broke, or repairing that relationship when they've said unkind things to a friend, that type of thing. The last thing is, we want to make sure that we do set limits with our children. So we don't have to have punishments. We don't have to throw out arbitrary consequences. But like I said, we're going to follow through with things. So if something comes up, we're going to explain a rule as needs arise. So for example, they're crashing their tricycles into each other, into the wall, right? So we say, hey, trikes aren't for crashing. We can ride the trikes on the path. They disregard that limit. We're going to state the consequence. Hey, trikes are not for crashing. If you keep crashing your trike, we're going to have to find something else to do. Then that trike gets crashed again, right? This is where we have to follow through here, but we're going to be matter of fact. We don't have to yell. We don't have to shame or guilt them. We're going to say, hey, remember we said it's not safe to crash the trikes? Let's go do something else. We're going to take the child and we're going to go do something else. They may not be happy about it. That's okay. We don't have to shame them. We don't have to tell them, stop crying. Any of those threats that oftentimes kind of come to our mind when we're trying to set limits and kids kind of push back against those limits, just be very matter of fact. I know, I see you're upset. You wanted to ride the trike, but it's not safe to crash it. So we're going to have to do something else. I have to keep you safe. We're going to be very boring and matter of fact about that when we're setting limits, because we're teaching a lesson. The more we kind of engage and make kids reactive, the less likely we're going to be able to actually teach them and set those limits and teach them those lessons we want to when we're looking at discipline. So that's all I have to say about that. Like I said, I have lots more to say. That's kind of everything in a nutshell. I highly recommend all of these references, these resources. So Dr. Gordon's parent effectiveness training is great. Positive discipline for preschoolers, as well as anything by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline are awesome books at really getting to the heart of positive child guidance and looking at how we can guide our children to teach them versus just doling out punishments for them to control their behavior. So thank you so much for joining us. Please, we do have a few poll questions if you don't mind answering those poll questions. And then after those poll questions, I will be able to take any of those questions that you guys submitted through chat during the webinar. While you guys are finishing up the poll, I did want to do a quick plug. So please do follow us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook at ICDFR.CSUSB. We will be listing when we have future infant toddler success parenting classes coming available. I highly recommend taking one of our full courses if you want to learn more about positive child guidance. Like I said, this was a very, very streamlined presentation. We hope to give you guys more webinars and help give you more information depending on what it is you guys are looking for. But highly, highly recommend taking a full course on parenting and looking at our relationships and how we can help guide children most effectively. And we have those for free for families in San Bernardino.
Okay, so we have a couple questions. I understand how these tools can help, but in the moment, it is hard to remember them. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so it's really hard in the moment to remember them. One of my best tips for that is in the moment to take a deep breath. So sometimes we have to like look down, take like 3 deep breaths if you have to, count to 10 in your head, whatever it may be to kind of separate yourself. Because it's the same thing with us as with kids. We'll be in that reactive state ourselves where we're not going to be able to kind of learn and guide effectively. So we have to, as best as we can, take that moment and finding a way to separate ourselves from that. Or when we first, if we are reactive and maybe we respond in a way that's not appropriate, it's okay to take that moment afterwards and say, whoa, whew, you know what, that was wrong. In the moment, I reacted inappropriately. This is how I want to handle that going forward. But keeping in mind that this is something that we're going to continue to have to work on, and we're never going to be perfect. You're never going to say the best thing. There's always maybe a different way to handle something, and that's okay. So give yourself credit for that, and knowing that just working and thinking about it is a really important step there. Focusing on our relationship and guiding and teaching them is going to be key. And we have lots and lots of interactions, and we can't get it right all of the time, and that's okay. Just to do your best.
Thank you for that. We have one last question. How do you help a 2-year-old calm down when they are unable to do so? Example, high emotions.
Yeah, so sometimes with a 2-year-old, when they're unable to calm down and they have those high emotions, sometimes depending on what's going on, they've got to write out those emotions. So we can be there with them. We can reassure them, let them know, hey, I'm here. I see you're having a tough time, but we can't, stop them from crying. And that's not something within our control. So while it may be tough for us to see a 2-year-old struggling with those tough emotions, we can't eliminate them. We can't eliminate big feelings. We can just be there to help them while they go through them and be that support for them. After the fact, if we can get at maybe what was leading to those, triggered that big emotional outburst to begin with, we can try to be a little proactive there. But once we're there, just recognizing that this is okay and that's all right. And I see you're crying and it's really rough right now, but that's okay. And as best we can too, going into that parent self-talk and taking those deep breaths and whatever mantra you have to repeat in your head as well. As far as it's okay, it's tough being 2, we're going to get through this. So we want to offer them calm and comfort as best as we can. Some children are comforted by being held, other children are not. And we can just give them that verbal reassurance, whatever works best for your child when they're stressed out, but knowing that we can't always solve those problems. We can just help support them through it. As their brain continues to develop, they're going to be able to have better control of those big emotions.
Thank you for participating in this webinar hosted by the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at California State University, San Bernardino. providing guidance for parents and families based on science and best practice since 2002.
Thank you, guys.